board of directors is the ultimate accountable organ within a business organization. And I teach corporate law, so my students are sometimes struck by the accountability mechanisms that there are or are not in Delaware corporate law. So for example, it's customary to say the boards of directors are under two basic fiduciary duties, a duty of care and a duty of loyalty. Well, duty of loyalty only comes into play if there's a conflict of interest. And the duty of care doesn't really have much to say about how businesses must behave on a day-to-day basis, because at least the way that it's been interpreted in Delaware is that it's sort of a minimal requirement as a result of something called the business judgment rule. So my students learn that and they think, well, what makes boards of directors do or try to do a good job? And how can boards of directors really do what we want them to do in business organizations, which is, as we're all learning today, make trustworthy organizations. So rather than answer that very difficult question, I'm going to leave it to our panelists.
One of the things that a board does, we must be engaged. All the directors have to be engaged. Fortunately for us at AFLAC, we have people from all political and business perspectives. The idea is to put together a group of individuals who can work closely with each other and work closely with the CEO. And one of the most important things we can do as a board is select the right CEO. We as a board have to look at everything that goes on in that company. We look at all of our investment practices, we look at our training of the staff, we look at the code of conduct. How do you build an organization that can be presented to the world as a trustworthy organization? We do the same thing with political contributions. In AFLAC, we have no permanent enemies and no permanent friends. We have permanent interests. And interest is what makes this company a successful company, what makes it successful to our shareholders, to our policyholders, and to our employees. And as a board, we have to make sure that all the policies and systems that we have in place at AFLAC is going to benefit that machine. When I say building trust, it starts with the CEO, it starts with great staff that you bring on board, it starts with a great working environment, and building trust in the regulatory halls of Congress, that we're not one of these companies that's out here to take advantage of consumers. And we think that as a result of doing it the way we do it, and as a board supervising all that it makes for a great product and a very, very successful operation.
I believe that by definition, the corporation is a social good. It was designed, we give it special legal status because of the key role it plays in our society in aggregating capital so that capital can be devoted to the provision of goods and services that society needs and wants. So right there's a social good. Unfortunately, I think boards and business people at times are so used to talking in financial terms and economic terms that they're not as comfortable talking about the social good in the very basic core activities that the corporation performs. When I think about the board's role with respect to trust, I think its first role is to define its expectations around the tone and the culture and the trust. I think next it needs to direct management to foster that tone. So I guess I differ a little bit with Ben. I think the CEO is really key in establishing trust, but I think it has to start with the board. I think the board has to think about how do we select the right CEO, how do we incentivize the CEO to have these issues front and center and to be an effective communicator around these issues. Boards need to be really prepared for crises. The most trustworthy organization in the world is going to have bad things happen. And that doesn't mean that they've done something evil or fraudulent, but bad things happen. I think we as the public and the media have to be understanding that bad things happen to good companies, and be a little more willing to sort of let them try to reestablish the trust. I think that the measure, though, is how a company handles a crisis when it happens.
What I think is so interesting today is that the work that it would take to convince shareholders of that trust is different today than it would have been, say, 10 years ago. And I would say that for two reasons. One, investors were burned badly in the financial crisis. The second thing, which may not be quite as obvious, is that it is the government itself, not just the United States government, but governments around the world, have taken a view in the aftermath of the financial crisis that it's not just government itself that has the capacity to prevent crisis, or at least to diminish the risks of crisis, but it's the investor community that should do this. That the investors should also play the role of sort of policing the market. Boards have to address them in very different ways today than they did 10 years ago. The main thing, the main lesson that investors really have, or rather the boards need to, I think, take away, is that they need to engage with investors. And that does not mean expounding and explaining only. It means listening.
What are companies facing today? Let's have a look. We have virtualization, mobilization, technology, transformational technologies. We've been hearing about cloud media, cloud technologies, social media, all of that stuff, right? That's what companies, irrespective of businesses, are facing. So the world is shrinking. We can get to global markets much easier than we ever could. And businesses are looking for those opportunities, new customers, new markets, things of that nature. So, and we have all of this going on, and then we have pressures from regulators, governments around the world, as just has been mentioned. We have pressures from investors and actually broader stakeholders, not just shareholders. A good board needs to ensure that they have a good management team. First and foremost, is the board composition correct? Do we have the right people to be on this board? Do they have the skills and expertise that's needed, notwithstanding the legal framework and all the duties that's already been mentioned? Do they understand the operations of the business? Do they understand and agree and can oversee the processes that exist for the strategy of the company to be executed in the markets that it needs to be? And how is that being done? Boards need to ensure that they are getting information from multiple sources, they're verifying it. You know, the well-known saying from a famous president, trust but verify. I think if that's one thing that boards need to be reminding themselves of every single day is, what are their information sources, where are they getting it from, and then are they able to make informed decisions in overseeing the business. Culture is so important. You know, we can talk about all the trust and everything, but it's really the culture that is the DNA of the organization. And increasingly, boards have to set the tone at the top. Back to, you know, what's our risk tolerance? Where are we going to go? How far are we going to go? When there is a crisis, how are we going to deal with that crisis? All of those things.
What are the obstacles to boards in building trustworthy organizations, or to use another phrase that our panelists use, culture?
I think the boards also need to be saying to management, we expect a culture of a certain amount of openness. We want to, you know, how do you convince us that this isn't a shoot the messenger culture, a culture in which we encourage challenge and discussion and debate? Of course, the starting point for that is in the boardroom, to have a place where you have challenge and discussion and debate and then form consensus. There are some good information sources out there now. We have social media, and directors, I'm not suggesting that they use it to talk about the company, but can certainly go onto Twitter and follow hashtags and learn a lot about their companies. They can go to blogs. I'm a partner in a law firm. I read blogs about law firms all the time because I find out what associates are thinking.
But I'm a strong proponent myself of the need for independent chairs of corporate boards, and that is the way in which you assert independence of management. It's a way in which to combat groupthink, There are CEO chairs combined who do a good job. I don't dispute that. But as a general matter, I think the best thing to engender trust and an obstacle to engendering trust is to have that combined. You need to have someone who is in charge of the board, who's an independent, who's looking out for the shareholder, for the stakeholders, and not for management.
And if you get the right board, half the obstacles are taken care of then. So if the JCPenney board had actually shopped at JCPenney, maybe we would have a different outcome. I understand the importance of the ways we are talking, and maybe I'm incorrect in saying that, but that's a perception that is worth thinking about. Do the people on the board bring in the perspectives that are needed to see where the business is going? They understand the business. Sometimes that's a trade-off between independence and expertise. That's why it's a group of people. It's not looking for all the skills in one person.
Just think about the fact of how fast media, social media and technology changes. And you have boards, many of them, to be honest, they don't know how to use Twitter, they don't know how to use social media, and yet these are the things that are now, constraining and opening opportunities for companies. If I'm an investor and I'm looking at the fact that you've got companies where boards don't change, my view of the risk at that company is that it goes up.
If you got a diverse board, you're going to ask that question from different vantage points, and that's very important. One thing you just said that's going to give Apple some heartburn. There's a big meeting of corporate directors out in California every September, and the issue came up with minority representation on Apple's board. And there's not a single minority on Apple's board, and you better believe that in due time there's going to be some issues with that. And what we try to do as a board is make sure that we reach out into every one of these communities where we're pulling in dollars from, and make sure that that community has input into us, and make sure they give us advice on what to do with our products.
I'm always concerned when we have a retirement age and that sets, or a term limit, it sets an expectation that you'll stay on the board. Most of our boards are elected every year, and I think every year the question should be asked, is this the best director I can have in that seat? And are they contributing at the highest level? Have our business needs changed? Do we need change? And until that, but that's not really happening. That in most boards there's a retirement age. The assumption is you're going to get renominated again and again and again, regardless of what the company needs. And I think that's a danger.